Good evening, everyone. I'm going to ask everyone that is on our Zoom to be muted. I am the Marketing and Communications Director at CavanKerry Press, Dimitri Reyes. And while we were waiting for everyone to come on, we did notice that there were a couple people that were unfamiliar with CavanKerry Press, but are at our reading this evening because they're either a friend of Carole Stone's or Matthew Thorburn, which are both of our featured readers for this evening. CavanKerry Press is a publisher that has been publishing works since the year 2000 out of Fort Lee, New Jersey, and we were also based out of Brooklyn, New York. We specialize in poetry and memoir that are about real lives and real stories. CavanKerry Press explores the emotional and psychological landscapes of everyday life. And we publish amazing books and amazing authors like Carole Stone, who is a New Jersey native, whose book launched yesterday. So this book just came out into the world. Yay! Carole Stone's limited editions is an amazing read. I read with Carole Stone last year in November, and I was talking to her about her manuscript at the time, which we had slated for the following year. And I was on the committee that really wanted this book, and I love the minimalism of this book. It's a quiet scream of a book, and I'm really interested in her reading that's going to happen a bit later today. Tamara Alquesi Coleman, who is our social media coordinator, in the chat will be putting where you can purchase this book, which is still on sale for 20% off if you were able to use the coupon code CKP Reading, and we'll be able to ship that book quickly because we have them in-house. Joining Carole Stone today, we also have Matthew Thorburn, and Matthew Thorburn is an author who also wrote String recently, which is a book that's also on sale this evening for 40% off. 40% off with the coupon code 04SAVENOW, which will also be in the chat. Fun fact about Matthew, also as a New Jersey writer, we are blessed to have two New Jersey writers with us this evening. He also wrote a blurb for Carole, so they're both quite friendly. The run of show for this evening, we are going to start with a quick introduction that I began, and we'll do a land acknowledgement. Afterwards, I will read Matthew's bio, and then Matthew will read for about 15 minutes. Afterwards, I will introduce Carole, the queen of this evening, and she will read for about 20. And then afterwards, we'll transition over to a Q&A session where folks from the audience can ask questions. Customarily, we usually do questions through the chat. So in the chat box, if you put questions throughout the evening, I will be sure that you get answered at the end. So before we move on to the reading for this evening, let us please start with our land acknowledgement. And as you know, my name is Dimitri Reyes, and again, I'm the Marketing and Communications Director here, so I get to do beautiful programming like this. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest CavanKerry series of virtual readings, celebrating our new and forthcoming releases. Next year in February marks our 30th reading. We've been doing this since pre-COVID times. Before we knew what to do with a Zoom link, we were doing these readings, so it's great that we're actually here. Before reading, I want to make sure that we take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey, belongs to the Lenni Lenape people. We honor their history, and we cannot function in our work as arts activists, nor offer a safe space for writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. Additionally, we are joining arts organizations across the country in celebrating National Native American Heritage Month. We honor the crucial role of Native American authors, including their articulation of their various social cultural perspectives and their permanent and necessary place in American literature. We encourage each of you to support a more equitable and inclusive publishing industry by reading and celebrating poetry from all of these groups of people, not just in November, but every month. So I am also going to spotlight Matthew for a second now, because now we're about to transition over to Matthew's reading. Matthew Thornburn's new book of poems is String, published by Louisiana State University Press. His previous books are The Grace of Distance, a finalist for the Patterson Poetry Prize, and Dear Almost, which won the LaSalle Prize. Originally from Michigan and for many years a New Yorker, he lives with his family in central New Jersey. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Thorburn.
Great. Thanks so much, Dimitri. And thank you, Carole, for having me as part of this reading. It's great to be here. to celebrate the launch of Carole's new book, which is, as Dimitri mentioned, I wrote a blurb for, so I got to read it early, and it's an amazing, beautiful, moving, unforgettable book, and I really love it, and I'm so glad to be here to celebrate it tonight and to read together. I think Carole and I met probably about 20 years ago when we were, as I remember at least, we were arts fellows together and did a reading together. So it's great to be reading again, kind of come full circle here. So I'm going to share some poems tonight from my new book, String, that Dimitri was just talking about. And String is, I think of it as a novel in poems. It's a book-length sequence of poems, and it tells the story of a teenage boy's experiences during a time of war and its aftermath. It's an imaginative book. It's not my story, but it's a story that it's a sort of a work of fiction. Thematically, it certainly comes from my life. It's very much a book about family and about being a parent and being a son. But all of the poems are in the main character's voice. His name is David, and during the course of this war, he loses his family and friends and the life he had known. But he lives to tell that story. And so this book is sort of his looking back on what's happened to him, trying to make sense of it, trying to unravel sort of the narrative of his life and figure out kind of what he's been through and how he can go on. So I'm going to read a few poems from mostly from sort of the beginning of the book, and then I hope that you may want to read some more of them. And I'll start with the first poem in the book. Like a novel, there's a sort of a cast of characters. So the poems are all in David's voice. His mother and father are in the book. There's a girl named Rosie. She's sort of the hero of the book, and she's mentioned in this poem and appears in this poem. And other family members and people in their town appear in the poems as well. Once there was crusty bread, a last half loaf, a rind of cheese. My parents danced in the empty kitchen. They knew we would never come back. They didn't know I listened in the dark. Brush and scuff of shoes, guttering candle. There was no moon. There was a broken oak, a silvery rain pooling in the grass. Once in the tall grass, there was a tan captain, chest smooth, pants unbuttoned. His holster amazed him by being empty. Rosie groaned, spat, clutched her wrinkled pink dress, pointed the pistol between his eyes. Between the trees, I saw how everyone dies. But once I was a boy who talked in circles. I walked in the woods. There was nowhere I wouldn't follow her. This next poem introduces some of the other people in the book. David's parents, his Uncle Albert. And one of the threads that sort of runs through the book is music, and this poem is called The Musicians. And it was sort of inspired as I was writing it. I was thinking a lot about and sort of picturing Pablo Picasso's painting Three Musicians. And so the scene here is sort of similar to what you see in that painting. The Musicians. Uncle Albert laughed. He sat backwards on the piano bench. He reached back for a chord, a halting melody. Roger slipped in under the piano bench. He barked once, twice, his tail keeping time between Jean's feet. Jean with his scratched glasses, father's oldest friend. Jean with his limp that didn't matter now, his clarinet's starry night shine, its husky groan. Before one song could end, another began. First, weary blues, then dead man blues, then stop time rag. Piano hands, mother called it. How Uncle Albert's moved even on the couch, even drifting off, fingers shaping chords in his sleep. Father tapped the piano lid like a drum. Aunt Adelaide strummed her washboard with thimbled fingers. Mother sang Honeysuckle Rose. The best songs are fast songs, Uncle Albert said. They end too soon. Street lamp light slipped between the blinds. It fell in stripes over their shoulders, over mine. Because I played too, my violin light as a bird under the bow. I was afraid to let go, so sure it would fly. These next two poems are sort of poems that go together. One is a sort of a portrait of David's father, and one is of his mother. And this is him imagining them before he was born and right before they got married. This first one's called My Picture of Father. Someone snapped him about to marry my mother. My, I say, though they had yet to imagine me. But always I will see him, slouching in the kitchen, after Uncle Albert dragged him out. All night laughing, so much singing, a taste of beer still in his mouth. And now, how early, how sunny. The window a square of white, blanking out Schmidt's farm. His dark hair shiny, his tie not tied. No way he could know what awaits. Which makes me love him even more. Makes me worry, though it's too soon, too late. Let me show you how time stops, the camera says. Let me show you how time hurtles on, leaves only this creased piece of cardboard, little square I carry in my pocket. How brave he looks, or how scared, if there's a difference. And this is the companion poem, and actually they're side by side. We can't really see it here, but they're side by side in the book, which is very appropriate. This is called My Picture of Mother. There is no matching photograph of mother. Almost still a girl, and so skinny, her fair hair braided. Too busy climbing into her complicated white dress, upstairs, in her own mother's house. Why so many hooks and eyes, she thinks. Why can you not sit still, her mother wonders, aloud, cinching her in, knowing her daughter will never get to sit still. What mother hoped for, wished or worried over, I'll never know. I was too young to know how to ask. And then this next poem is the last poem in the first section. Sort of the arc of the book is kind of like a novel where the first part sort of introduces the characters and their town is invaded. And then as the book progresses, the question the family is sort of dealing with is should we stay? Should we go? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? Kind of as things get worse. So this is the last poem in the first section. It's called Pale Stars. I saw Rosie suddenly after looking a long time into purple irises untouched beside the burnt wreck. The blackened plane took off half her house. My knees ached from crouching low. Last ribbons of smoke, acrid stink in my throat. Days I dreamed green fingers in the dirt. No one said, stop growing. No one said, hold your breath. But then I saw her, hair, her dress just darker than irises, a bare shoulder. She hunched purple in the purple gray, caught the same fading light in worried folds. At first I could not see her, could have stared hand to brow, and never seen. But then the bells of her sleeves, her hands white stars cut out. Everything else was dirt, was broken, buried. I looked longer, lower, long pale thighs, a smear of blood, a handprint, bruised dark. She crouched in flowers, a spreading shadow on the torn up ground. I couldn't stop looking. She turned. She saw me. Run, Rosie mouthed, run. I'm going to skip ahead a ways. So after that poem, David and Rosie get separated and he can't find her for quite a long time and doesn't know what has happened to her and is wondering where she is, where she's okay and hoping that she is. So this poem is him looking and kind of what's happening in the town. And it's called Which Way Now? I thought I saw you stepping into the street. Heard you tapping at the window, whispering my name. Once you pinched my elbow in the tall grass, your hair hanging over my face. almost kissing me, then kissing me. There when I wanted you, which was always, which was sitting on a speckled rock by the cold river, your hands hiding scraped knees. Walking the muddy road, you gulped from my canteen, a thread of water silvering your long neck. Once in Schmidt's field, we crouched between rows of green, your finger to my lips. A soldier ran past. I stared at the dirt on your toes, tasted dirt on your finger. Once you slipped into the shadow between two trees. Once the amber light falling in the river. So I looked in its broken mirrors, its galloping horses. I wandered the woods calling Rosie, Rosie in the fields, the barn. I waited. I wondered, when would you be back? I searched the shuttered post office, torn letters under my feet. Under the stars I called until I heard, thought I heard, you asking, where could we ever be safe? And I'm going to end with just a couple more poems from this second section of the book. I was mentioning earlier that the question that sort of runs through a lot of this is what they're going to do and when they're going to leave. So I'm going to read one more poem about, if I can find it here, I'm going to read one more poem about David's father and then read one more poem about them deciding what to do. This is called To Tighten and to Tune. A noun like a nail, father called out. A verb, the quick hammer, to pound it home. He said, because he made words stand still, mean what they were meant to mean. Because speaking softly at the sink, he washed grease from the creases of his hands, said all questions must end in the curious vice grip of a question mark. Or should they? Would they? Because he waited while I leaned closer in the kitchen's dim light to read the words laid out like ratchets, wrenches, washers. Because he guided me through each sentence until its wheels turned liquid smooth. Make words do their work, he said, checking the bolts of periods, commas, ear cocked for the scrape and whine of a slipping gear. Because now I take up his pen to tighten, to tune. Sentences reworked until they break the hurt. They make a song. And I just want to say thanks again. I'm so glad to be here. I'm going to end with one more poem. This is the end of the second section, when David's family decide what they're going to do. And it's called Couldn't Let Go. How could we stay or go or wait and go later? Could we run, jump a train, pray for fog to drift over us instead of bombs? The bridge stopped now, halfway across the river, as if it changed its mind. The church gone, Schmidt's barn gone, rocks in the well, salt in the fields, and Rosie. A cat picked at something bloody in a puddle. Mother buttoned my coat. She said, David. She looked at me. She said, David. That was father's name, too. She gripped his arm. There was something she needed to go back for. What couldn't she let go? She didn't say. I'll never know. I'll meet you there, she said. We'll take the train, she said. He said, Angela, please. Kiss me, she said. Don't say goodbye. So thank you very much.
Matthew, thank you. Thank you so much for that. For now, folks, Matthew will be returning towards the end of our session today for Q&A. So if you had any questions you liked to ask Matthew, please put it in the chat box and we'll get back to it. For now, Matthew, I'm going to beam you out and then I'll bring you back soon. So Okay, so now we are going to invite Carole Stone, the queen of the evening. Now, I will say, with having a queen here for the evening, we did have a bit of technical difficulties. So Carole is tuning in via audio today, but she will still be here with her words, and that's what we're here for. So I'm going to start with Carole Stone's bio, and then afterwards we'll be hearing Carole's voice. So Carole Stone is a distinguished professor of English emerita at Montclair State University. She has published 5 books of poetry and 4 chapbooks, among them Traveling with the Dead, Backwaters Press, and American Rhapsody, CavanKerry Press. Her recent work has appeared in Blue Fifth Journal, Slab, Bellevue Literary Review, and Nimrod. Her book, No Happy Ruins, was one of 5 finalists in the Laura Boss Narrative Poetry Contest. She has won 3 fellowships from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts and a fellowship to the Rothermere American Institute at Oxford University, England. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carole Stone. And Carole, I asked you to unmute. Perfect.
Thank you. I'm sorry that you're unable to see my beautiful self, but perhaps it's just as well. In any case, this book, limited editions, the interesting thing for me was how quickly it came after the death of my husband. And that has never happened before. I labor over my manuscripts for years, even as we are here tonight. I'm laboring over a couple of manuscripts, but this one came together very, very quickly. And so the book begins with dating and marriage and, early phases of marriage, its joys, its complications. And then it goes on to my husband's illness and taking care of him. And then at the end of the book comes back to what is, I guess, for me, the basis, the structure of the book, and that is the joy of life, the joy in living. And so I think I will begin with a poem about how we met. It's called Blind Date. We met on a blind date. He's cute, the woman from your hometown, Woonsocket, who introduced us, said. And you were standing by the door in khakis and a button-down shirt. We drove to Rolf's restaurant in Irvington, sat at the bar. You didn't say a word. Instead, enough of being the vivacious one on blind dates, I told myself, this one better talk. And you did, explaining the scene in the pub in Ulysses, where the citizen called Bloom a dirty Jew. And that's when I knew you would be mine. There's a very Joycean theme throughout this book. My husband loved Ulysses. And of course, we went on with the group in New York that I'm still meeting with to Finnegan's Wake. So everything I know about Joyce from his having gotten me interested. So this is called the Joyce Group. We look out the window at a cold, cloudy sky, decide we're not too tired to take the 66 to Manhattan. You carry the hardback copy of Ulysses for me. The snowstorm turned the city streets gray as an elephant. A dog walker pulls 3 poodles. In Bleecker Street Park, like lifers, old men bend over chessboards. In the middle of 8th Avenue, a man dodges traffic, yelling, hey, it's good, all good. The Korean grocer displays chrysanthemums, pink as the December sunset. We buy a bouquet to give to the group's host. I ask you what we'll do when we finish Joyce's books. You laugh, read them again, which of course is what I'm doing. Day trip to Brighton. I think you'll figure out in the poem it's Brighton, England, but I'm just going to say that in advance. Brighton's pier, jellied eels, candied apples, babies in strollers, fair-skinned English mums turn pink. Tea time, bits of sugar between our teeth. We sipped small kindnesses from blue china cups. Sometimes you were me, sometimes I was you, by the beautiful sea, on green striped deck chairs, husband and wife, wordless in the sun. We nodded off. This poem, for some reason, is my son's favorite, and he doesn't always like poetry, so I'm very happy that he likes this poem. The Luxembourg Gardens. On a hot Sunday afternoon, cranky and tired from the metro crowds, we stepped into the Luxembourg Gardens, past a statue of an embracing couple, limbs frozen in desire. In the gazebo, a brass band played the Radetzky March, the string section out of tune. We didn't care and applauded when the leader bowed. We rested on a bench, my head on your lap, as if we were just beginning our lives together, young and ignorant of what lay ahead. Even the pigeons that splattered us couldn't change this moment. We walked away from the Medici fountain, the two chestnut trees that bent over us like a mother and father, happy their children found pleasure. Okay, so one more here from the marriage section. In the matter of pumpkin soup, no one likes Dad's soup, my daughter tells me. It's cold, too spicy. She is a mother now, the child who sat cross-legged, round and good as a wine sap on the nursery school floor. Each Thanksgiving, her father chooses a fat pumpkin, scoops out the seeds, boils and mashes the yellow rind, mixes in the heavy cream. I can't make this man change, I tell my daughter. Eat. So let's see. I suppose I might as well read the title poem. That's always a good idea. Limited editions. Our neighbors, the Liebers, married 72 years, died today in East Hampton, 2 hours apart, ages 96 and 97. It's time to go, sweetie, Gerson still painting told Judith. When we drive on Old Stone Highway, pass by their estate, I think of her exquisite brocaded handbag designs carried by Jackie Kennedy, Princess Diana, Barbara Bush, without straps in the shape of fans, eggs, pigs. You could hardly fit anything into the tiny clutches, a lipstick, $100 bill, limited editions, as we are. If you ever get to Springs, East Hampton, I encourage you to drive there. It's really just a fascinating experience. And they bought that house when land was cheap back there in Springs, East Hampton, and it has a big, beautiful garden. So it's very worthwhile visiting. Okay, what else? I guess this is where the book begins to take a turn to illness. It's called Kugel. You have no appetite, could be the meds. Cranberry juice, flan, rice pudding. Tastes terrible, you say. The last time I baked a potato kugel, I was in my 20s. Recipe written in the blank back pages of From a Baglione to Zabaglione, my first cookbook. I measure out a cup of butter and 2 of flour, grate 3 small onions and 4 potatoes by hand, add 3 eggs. You take a forkful, push your plate away, say, I don't feel great. I'll lie down for a bit. I scrape your kugel onto my plate. Let's see, where do I want to go next? Paradox. Your books huddle together on shelves like abandoned lovers, begging to be read aloud. I count 35 by Irish authors like Joyce, you love to quote. Do you think life is a paradox? A quiet man, you let yourself be in the wake's lines without punctuation, running over each other. Oxygen mask removed, breath stopped, pulse silent. The attendants carried you away, not the way the hero goes out in a 40s movie, smile on his face. Here's looking at you, kid. I guess you'll remember that one, huh? Oh, let's see. Okay, one more from that section. Leaves. Your ashes float like the white dust of the blackboard erasers the teacher let her favorite student clap. Are you in the sky? As a girl, I believe my parents were there. On clear winter nights, I found them among the stars. Silly child, silly woman. The dead are dead and live nowhere. In early October, the leaves fall from trees to earth and are carted away. They feel no exquisite pain as you did your last weeks. Pulse failed, no longer speaking or hearing. The rattle of the red leaves is a cry, a shout to remember your weekly visits to a museum, driving our two granddaughters to and from nursery school, all that you were, fallen away. Okay, I think I'll just read two more and then we'll see where we are. Vanilla. Vanilla comes from orchids that bloom beside graves. In Spanish, it means little pod. The Aztecs named it Tlachtli, little flower. It makes me feel like a little flower. It is the second most expensive spice after saffron. I don't care. I brought back 10 pods from Veracruz. Their fragrance anoints me with sweetness. I peel them open, sniff them, get a little high, drink from bottles of extract, drown my throat. Vanilla has no expiration date. Okay, one more. Joy. How they love death in Mexico. I never knew there was such joy in the dying of the body. Tongue, nose, ears gone. Like a shrine, our living room shelf holds a skeleton from Morelia. Black dress, veil, lacy white. She holds a shriveled pan. Rows of gray black pots from Oaxaca sit beside the ones you fired until you couldn't anymore. Chichen Itza Mayans buried their dead with maize in their mouths so they would have food for their journey. You climbed to the pyramid's top. Oh, your teeth, oh, mouth throbbing, oh, your body breathless that used to burn. Am I within time limit? Should I read one more, or what do you think?
Oh, Carol, if you want to read one from each of the last two sections, you can go for it. I think you have all of us entrapped in the magic of your voice.
Well, sorry, was that read one more?
Yeah. If you want, read one
Okay,
from the
great.
last. You could
I
read
got
one.
lost in what you were saying. That's okay.
That's okay.
Right,
Read
let's
one
see.
from the last of the two sections.
Yeah. Down Mexico way. I hear Death on the rooftop, strumming a guitar, singing south of the border, down Mexico way. At the outdoor market, Death pretends to be just another American tourist squeezing avocados for their ripeness. He peeks at my Facebook page to see how many friends I have, not Death of the big black cloak and scythe, but the one in the red jacket and straw hat, the waiter at La Cocina taking my order for pozole. You join me, light up a cigarillo, order huevos rancheros and Nestle Abuelita. I tell you about the January 6th hearings, give you the passcode for Wi-Fi. so you can catch up. You aren't interested. Pay the bill with cash and vanish. The smiling waiter comes to the table, asks, "How many for dinner, Senora?" Okay, thank you.
Yay. Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, so everyone, let me spotlight myself real quick. So you heard Carol speak from Limited Editions. We're about to have a bit of a Q&A. Her book is 20% off with coupon code CKP Reading if you don't have that already, and it's going to be in the chat. And then String, thank you so much, Matthew, is also on sale for 40% discount with 04 Save Now, which is going to be in the chat. I'm going to bring you over to Matthew, so we'll both be here together, and then I'll make sure I put it on speaker mode, so Carol, when you speak, your name will pop up so we know that it's you speaking. So I do have a couple of questions, and anyone, if you have questions in the chat, please put them in the chat, and as always, we'll be sure to make sure that you are heard. We're hearing some amazing things. Rosalind said wonderful reading, Carol. Tamara said amazing. Jennifer Poteet said terrific. Ronald Bremner, hey Ron, nice to see you. He said, Carol, it's always a pleasure to hear your poetry. Excellent, wonderful. Sip small kindnesses from blue china cups is something that Miss Stefano put down. Yeah, that's really poignant. Okay, folks, I do got a question. So Carol, in the beginning, and you've done this in other conversations we had reading before, you always preface the book with saying that it's about joy of life and joy of living. A lot of individuals that are under the impression that poetry has a lot of pain and grief would be right. But Matthew and Carol, both of you find the joy and observing the easy and hard parts of life also. So I guess my question is, and Carol, I'll ask you this question first, Carol. How do you find the joy in writing when there's so much pain in the world?
Boy, you really ask hard questions.
They get progressively harder, so I hope we could.
It's hard to explain, but we have so many poets in the audience, who would probably agree with me that there's something in the act of writing itself. Now, I join a group every Saturday that is a free writing group, and the leader sends topics and we respond to them. And every Saturday I stare and I look at the topics and say, this is ridiculous. How can I do anything? And almost immediately, and I do not understand the process, a poem comes out of me. I'm not saying they're all 100% good, but some are good and some are at least a start. That's the joy of it. Where does it come from? How does that happen? I have absolutely no idea. And it's not, free association. I wouldn't call it that. It's just that there's something that gets triggered and the words come out on the page. Now, I don't know how it is for fiction writers. I have written some fiction, actually stories about Mexico, because as you could tell from my poems, that I spent some time there. We went there every single winter. And I think fiction is perhaps more of it. Fiction writers in the audience, just correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a very intellectual, more intellectual process in the structure and so forth. And so the joy in a poem is just what's going to come out on the page. The pain of the poem is called revision. And I am an inveterate reviser. But I can only tell you that the poems get better as you revise them. And for all the poets listening, I'm sure they would agree with me. So I don't know if the revision is exactly what I would call joy, but certainly the initial writing of the poem is.
Right. That's excellent. Yeah, there's something arcane about just doing free writes, that there's something there that's on the subconscious level and we don't really know until we put pen to paper. And I think for poets, I think the reason why like when we think of fiction writers or we think of just writers that write prose in general and then we think of poets, it can seem that poetry writing can be so much more prolific because it's so much easier to write a draft of a poem because it could be like really concise than something that is, you know, maybe a bit longer of an essay or a fiction piece. But I also think that there's a lot that could exist in that white space, right? There's a lot that I think us as the readers, we end up filling in within those gaps. And sometimes, as you said, we fill it in with the grief or the pain. And then when we write it, we can kind of write our ways in those revisioning processes of it when we're reimagining something we could write it into a different direction. Yeah, that's amazing, Carole. Thank you. Matthew, same question. How do you find the joy when there's so much pain when you write?
Well, it's a great question. I think, and I love Carole's answer. I totally agree. I think there's, at least for me, you know, I find in writing this book, which is imagined, but certainly a sort of a dark and story with a lot of despair in it and everything. But the actual act of writing is I think no matter what I'm writing about, it's fun, or I probably wouldn't do it. You know, I mean, no one's like, you know, sort of asking you to write another poem necessarily, but it's a pleasure in that process, and it's that sort of process of discovery to me that don't usually know where a poem is going to go. And certainly with these poems, and most of them started with a phrase or an image or just something very, very small, and sort of going with that and kind of seeing what that led to and what that would sort of open up into the poems that I was writing. It can, for me at least, be kind of a weird disconnect, because when I was writing this book, or in a way I wrote this book in response to a previous book I'd written called Dear Almost, which is actually very autobiographical. It was a very difficult book to write and to read from. But even writing that book, you know, I found in the midst of it, I would kind of catch myself because I'm writing this very painful thing. But the process of writing was something that I really loved, and I did it. I work I used to work in an office. I work from home now, but I work in a sort of corporate job. And on my lunch hours, I would go out and sit outside and eat my lunch and work on this manuscript. And it was something I really looked forward to, as much as what I was writing about was really painful. Like the process of writing was such a pleasure. So it is a kind of an odd way that those things go together, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. And I guess that even goes back to Carole when she was even talking about some of the stuff she liked, like you know, she spent some time in Mexico and those Mexico poems came in. I think it's the idea of like trying to find that pleasure in the process, that no matter what you're writing, if you're enjoying it, it's going to be a good experience. When I was in my MFA, a big proponent to one of our poetry workshops was that you always got to try to find the way you can still stay in love with the writing, because what happens when you, especially in an MFA, like after folks graduate, and gosh, this is something that I've been seeing, like folks fall out of the writing game, right? They just start working, they get families, and I think priorities start moving themselves around, and sometimes you fall out of love with it. And then what ends up happening, like we had this last reading last month, you know, someone fell out of writing and then they fell into it. They came back to it like 20 years later. And that happens sometimes, right? So going with the ebbs and flows of when you're actually in love with writing, I think is great. And like with your last book, you were sitting outside. It was something you were looking forward to. And I think that's what we connect to. So yeah, thank you so much for that, both of you. You also bring up something interesting, because it's kind of sounds like, Matthew, that you kind of catalog poems when you're going into the book. The last one was semi-autobiographical. This one was fictionalized. And then limited editions, Carole, you said this was the easiest one that basically wrote itself in some senses. And both of these books in varying ways felt like they did read like novels. And I'm starting to see things in literature come in vogue and they fall out of vogue. Right now, we're in the moment where a lot of poetry books that are coming out, they're kind of like in theme. They kind of feel a bit more narrative in recent years. So I'm interested. When did you see, for both of you, and Carole, I'll start with you first. When did you see that these poems you were writing were forming a specific narrative? that was going to end up becoming this book?
Well, as I said, this book was a cohesive narrative more than any other book that I wrote. And I guess it was because I was just focused on the one, on the death of my husband, and those poems just all came out. Poets work differently, I think. Possibly some, because books are very cohesive now. I think this is what people are writing. So they may, unlike me, decide in advance, I'm going to write about the hurricane in Hawaii, and then all of the poems are about the hurricane. I can't work like that. I just write what I'm feeling anxious about, moved by, however you want to put it at the time. And then it's my job to put them together. So I don't know if that really answers your question. I really would like someday to be able to just say, okay, I am going to write this book about, well, actually, now that I think about it, I am doing that at the moment. Oh my goodness. See, I have to free associate in order to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So right now I'm writing, you should pardon the expression, about being older.
Okay.
Because that's what's bothering me. But not that there's anything I can do about, you understand. And so that's what's coming out of me. And so for the first time, well, I should say the second time, because the elegies came out that way too. The poems are, I will be able, I think, to put them together in a book, but that doesn't happen all the time.
Right.
So that's just what I'm, emotionally vested in at the moment.
Yeah. That sounds wonderful, because I always feel like a new poetry project kind of feels like the honeymoon stage in a new relationship, where everything is fresh and you're trying to impress the other person and you're taking them out on dates, and everything around them just looks like it shines in a different color. I feel like that's what poetry projects look like, because there's so much to explore and everything feels so new that way. Carole, I'm glad I'm making you like think metacognitively about your own work. You're like, oh yeah, now I actually am writing this game. That's great. I love interviews like this, because we really get to, you get to pull yourself out of that self. And I'm going to ask another follow-up question that's going to really make you dig. And I can't wait for that. But first, Matthew, like same question. This one was a work of fiction, but it did follow a very kind of like intimate thread. So what came first? Did the narrative come first? Did the poems come first? And then you're like, oh, this is fitting into something?
This book really started out of a couple of things, but one of the main things was I was reading translations of a French poet who I really like, named Jean Falin, and he wrote these wonderful short poems that I would definitely encourage everybody to look up if you haven't read them. But these little short poems are looking back to sort of a pre-war childhood and sort of a lost world that he had grown up in a way. And I found that very inspiring and very interesting. And reading those, I had a notebook and I just started writing down sort of phrases that came to me and ideas. And that's kind of where I got the notion of writing something to do with a war. And I really wanted to write something fictional, just in response to that previous book, Dear Almost, because that's a very autobiographical book. And so I wanted to do something different. I remember hearing Seamus Heaney was interviewed once, and he said a lot of wise things, but one thing he said was, if there's no surprise for the writer, there's no surprise for the reader. And he felt like he had to kind of keep changing up what you're doing and not sort of get in a rut or be too sure about kind of where a poem is going. And that's something I took to heart. So I try to keep doing something different each time. But so for me, I was writing these things down in my notebook, and I started to go back to that and write some poems. And I think once I had a few poems, I sort of recognized that some of them were in sort of an omniscient narrative voice, and some of them were in different voices, but a number of them were in what seemed like this boy's voice. And I sort of had kind of backed into writing in this voice. And once I recognized that, then I sort of wanted to do more with that. And so it kind of became a project, although I would say like I sort of felt like there was a way that like a novelist would do it, like you're saying, that they might sort of plot it out or have more of an intentional plan. And I didn't really have that. I just sort of had this voice, and I sort of went poem by poem thinking, sort of who else would be in this world? I should write something about his parents, or something about who else lives in this town, or there's this girl that he is in love with, and so it just kind of like poem by poem kind of spread out. And I thought that if I just wrote enough poems, and then later on I could kind of figure out how they would go together and that they might make a book, which is what I did, and which is maybe not a good logical way to do it because it took a long time to figure out how do these go together. But that's kind of how it happened for me. And I think for me, it's more not necessarily having a project in mind, but just sort of having an idea of, I've written a few poems that seem to go together in this way, whatever it might be, and then kind of think, well, what else could I write that sort of like kind of builds on that or could go with that. And for me, that's kind of a way of coming up with a group of poems that sort of kind of go together in some way.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that seems a bit more of a natural way, and I think that's a lot of how poetry books are also made too. I think Carole mentioned that, the difference between the prose and the poetry, like you get to kind of rely on all that white space and kind of fill those gaps, or perhaps maybe find some strings to tie together, hence hence the book.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Plug that in. You're welcome. Okay, cool. So moving forward, Carole. Hi, Carole. So you had a long and notable poetry career. We all know this. What are some of your favorite moments that you had as an author?
One of my favorite.
One of your favorite moments you've had as an author throughout your career.
Oh boy. Well, I could just simplify the whole thing by saying getting a letter of acceptance, which I think everyone out there would agree with me. Like, I got a letter today. I can't remember what press it was because I keep sending my work out and manuscripts out and said, congratulations, you were amongst the 10 chosen in our final whatever. Having gotten, possibly, I can't even count the number of rejections before that. Oh my God, the elation. So that's how it works. I mean,
that's wonderful. The small wins, right? It's those small wins that mean the most. That's wonderful. Thank you. Matthew, same question. So what has been one of your favorite moments as an author thus far?
I think kind of in a similar spirit, I think for poets, it can be disheartening or depressing, and it can be for me that if you publish a book and it's a small print run and it may never go out of print, you sort of sell them one by one at readings, and you see fiction writers who are selling thousands of books or more than that, and just the scale is so different. But I try to remember, like, the flip side of that is that I feel like so many of the books that I've sold as like I meet the person who's reading it, or someone says, I read your book, or I'd like to read it, and it's so personal. And I mean, I love to write and I love to publish my work and see it in print, but to hear from anyone who says that they read something that you wrote and they liked it, whoever it is just puts the wind in my sails. It's just such a great feeling. So I would say that whenever that happens, at a reading or wherever it might be.
Yeah, that's great. Carole, was there a certain like reading that you remember that you had that someone afterwards, maybe someone of notoriety or just a random person in the audience you had a really great exchange with that stuck with you?
Mm-hmm. Mm. An exchange when I was reading and someone.
Yeah. So like if
I guess I've written incessantly. I don't know what Freud would say about this, about my dead parents who died when I was 4. So most of my books are really about that. I remember once I told a friend, that is the last poem that I'm going to write about my dead parents. And this person said, but you just wrote one. So, obsession is the name of the game. And I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
No, it does. I think we all, wasn't it who was it? Was it Richard Hugo that talked about obsession engines, that we all kind of hold on to some sort of subject that follows us throughout our careers, or Donald Hall that says that you write the same poem for your entire life.
Yes, yes, I remember him saying that. He was so right.
Yeah. That's totally the same thing. And the same tropes and the same subjects will just keep showing up in all of our work, right? I have this thing with pigeons. It just shows up everywhere. I have a whole book on it, right? So it happens. Yeah, that's great. Like holding on to our
Well, I just want to say one more thing about it. It was interesting. It occurred to me the other day. My book, American Rhapsody, which was published 10 years ago by CavanKerry Press, which was entirely about the early death of my parents. 10 years later, they're publishing this book that's about the death of my husband. There was some synchronicity when that thought came to me.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, look at that. The metacognitive stuff is coming back again.
Yeah.
Making you think about a lot of that tonight. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to end with one last question, and then maybe we'll have an encore poem from each of you. So some emerging authors usually watch these YouTube videos afterwards, scouring the Q&As for questions and advice. For you both, what advice would you give to new authors? And maybe Matthew, we'll start with you first. What advice would you give to emerging authors?
I don't teach, but I've mentored a few people, and I think what I try to tell them, or hopefully they get from me, is to be stubborn and to believe in yourself. That you have to be persistent. Like Carole was saying, keep sending the poems out, keep getting those rejections, and then acceptances will come. But just to keep going. If it's what you want to do, keep going, because like I said earlier, like no one's sitting there asking, please write another poem. But if you want to do it, then you just have to believe in it and get your work out there and just be determined. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. And speaking of those being determined, we did get someone else in the chat that said the small wins, and it kind of sounds like an addiction to gambling. You keep playing and you lose a lot, but just to experience the thrill of getting that one acceptance letter, it keeps you going. So in a way, we're kind of addicted to that. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, the stubbornness and the persistence.
That's true. I just had one more thing that makes me think too. I mean, if the other thing I would say is if you have a chance, work on a literary magazine and see how many submissions they get, and recognize what just the numerical odds are when you send work out. That you have to keep at it.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, and the thing is, they could only accept 10, and you could have been number 11. It's super close odds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. Carole, what's some advice you would give to an emerging author?
Well, keep writing, of course, is the most obvious one. But actually, when you mentioned that, I wasn't thinking so much about advice, but I taught, among other things, creative writing at Montclair State. And I remember, sadly, that I do believe that I over-critiqued, that it wasn't what these young people needed. They needed encouragement. And so sometimes I just think that our workshops, they're like hands-on, take out that word, make that the first stanza. And it's very helpful. But sometimes maybe just writing the poem and letting it sit there is the most important thing. So I've just been thinking from myself, I've just been thinking a lot about that issue lately, how much critiquing is really good, editing and so forth, and how much is just let the poem be on the page, at least for a very young person. I think that's very important.
Yeah, that's very astute, Carole, and thank you for mentioning that. I do think there are a lot more writing programs that are kind of moving in that direction of kind of trying to foster the creativity with some critiquing, like being a bit softer. But yeah, I mean, like I was listening to a podcast recently, and they talked about that there was a study with 2 groups of children, and they were meant to do a task in the room. And when they completed it, one group of the children was told, "Oh, you're so intelligent, you're so smart, like great job." And then the other group of students were told, oh, you tried so hard, you put a lot of effort into it. And then they took those same 2 groups and made them do a following project after that. And the group that was encouraged through effort rather than intelligence showed more improvement, right? So, you know, there's data there saying that just giving folks encouragement and telling them to keep going can really take them farther than just, you know, based on the logic and critiquing. But that's excellent. So we're at 8:05. I do maybe want to end with an encore poem from each of you. Matthew, do you have one last poem you'd like to read?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thanks for asking. I'll just read one little short poem. I just thought of this because we're talking about finding the joy in dark or difficult things, and so this book is all about a war and all of this loss and everything that David goes through. But what I also wanted to do was to talk about what it's like to be a teenager, and that as this war is happening, he also has fallen in love with Rosie, and he has those feelings, and that you know, doesn't matter if there's a war out. If you're in love, you're in love. So I wanted to read one short poem that's more about that, and this is a little bit different from some of the other poems in the book. This is called Her Breath. We sat once in a field of summer grass and buttercups, one after another after another. Rosie leaned back on her elbows in her yellow dress, her tan legs stretched out before her. Her brown dog, Roger, stretched out beside her. What a perfect word. Buttercup. I just wanted to say buttercup. I would have kept saying buttercup, buttercup. But for heaven's sake, she breathed against my ear, stop talking about flowers.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Matthew, that was great. Thank you. Carole?
I'm going to read the last poem in my book. Fine. The carp gasps for air while I sink the Chinese chopping knife into its silvery scales. Seam it in ginger. Lay the fish on a blue porcelain platter. Honor it with lemon roses as the ancients did. At last, I have the patience to lift the flesh from the bony spine, learn to hold chopsticks, raising each morsel to my lips. Li Po, drunkenly reaching for the moon in a pond, fill in. Whatever is to come, I am glad I've picked these bare.
Wow. Thank you so much, Carole.
You're
Ladies
welcome.
and gentlemen, that was Carole Stone and Matthew Thorburn. For the last time, these 2 books are available for discount probably today and tomorrow, maybe until this weekend. Limited editions is 20% off with coupon code CKP Reading. String is on sale for 40% off with the coupon code 04SAVE now. At this point in time, I'm going to remove my spotlight, have the whole gallery up, and I'm going to ask everyone to unmute so you can all say your goodbyes and celebratory remarks. Okay, everyone except Monica. I'm sorry, Monica, but that was really loud on your side.
I could listen to another hour of you both reading. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,